Welcome to another exciting episode of the Scouting for Growth podcast. I'm your host, Sabine VdL, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a truly inspiring guest to the show. Sam White, the CEO of Stella Insurance. Sam is not just a leader in the insurance industry, she's a trailblazer, entrepreneur, and advocate for creating a fairer, more inclusive world. As the driving force behind Stella Insurance, Sam has redefined what it means to be a mission-led company. Yes, mission purpose-led. Stella isn't just about providing corporate and travel insurance, actually. It is about empowering women, championing equality, and delivering products that truly meet the needs of its customers. With a focus on innovation, customer experience, and social impact, Stella has become a standout brand in the insurance space, winning multiple awards for its outstanding service and claims experience. In today's conversation, we'll dive into Sam's incredible journey as an entrepreneur, a vision for Stella Insurance, and how she's challenging the status quo in the traditional male-dominating industry. We will also explore her thoughts on leadership, innovation, and the future of insurance. So whether you are an entrepreneur, a leader, or simply someone looking for inspiration, this episode is packed with insights you won't want to miss. So let's get started. Hi, Sam. Thank you so much for joining me on Scouting for Growth.
Thank you for having me on, and it's so lovely to see you again. I don't think I've seen you properly in the flesh since Barcelona.
I know. I can't believe it's already 2 years,
At
right?
least, yeah.
And then you have been traveling a lot. You have been in Australia. Each time I've been trying to see you, Sabine, I have to go to Australia. So you also have been traveling quite a lot.
I have. I do love Australia, and, I was silly enough to set up a business over there. So the commute is longer than I was anticipating.
This is definitely a slightly long commute. I remember my time when I used to travel a lot to Australia, to Sydney and Melbourne. I used to stop in Singapore just for 1 or 2 days because that trip is so long. But I then used to stay for 3 or 4 weeks actually in the region to actually, make it work physically.
Acclimatise.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. So, Sam, let's get started and let's go into your journey. What got you into insurance? What is the background when we think about Sam White? And, what are you trying to achieve, which is different from the masses, let's say?
Yeah, what's the background? Look, I set my first company up when I was 24 from my sister's conservatory. And I think if you'd asked me that question when I was 26, like what you're doing and why you're doing it, you would have got a completely different answer. So perspective is a wonderful thing, and I think we understand each other, ourselves rather, a lot more as we get older. And so I can look back now and say, okay, why do you really think that you got into this industry and what drew you in? And, as a small child, I was dyslexic as a kid.
Okay.
And that kind of, I think, creates a different type of mindset in terms of problem solving, but it also builds quite a lot of resilience. So in the early years, it was harder for me to follow mainstream education in the way that you would normally follow it. And I managed to make my way through, and I did okay educationally in the end, and went on to do a degree, albeit I left a couple of years in because I wanted to go and make some money. But I think this sort of theme of approaching things differently, resilience, and also what I realised about myself more recently is I like complicated problems. And insurance is one hell of a complicated problem. It's a complex business, and trying to solve for it is actually complicated. And that, I think, actually was behind what drew me into it in the initial instance.
So how long have you been in insurance?
So my first business was actually, I would still classify it as tangential to insurance. So my first business was handling motor insurance claims. And that was simply, it was the only job I'd had. And when I decided that I was unemployable, which was probably 2 years into my first and only job, when I realised that the expectation was that even if I didn't agree with the management's decision, I would have to go along with it. And I realised that wasn't something that I particularly enjoyed, and I wanted to do something for myself. I think that if you count the claims business as being also insurance, then I will have been in insurance for 26 years.
Incredible.
So, yeah,
Wow. Yeah, I mean, same as me. I've been in insurance for 28 years. I studied in France. I did Erasmus. I came and I stayed. At the time, many French people. And, at the time, Lloyd's of London used to come to the business school, to university, to actually talk about finance, talk about insurance, and the difference that Lloyd's brought to the market. And then it would invite us, students, to go and see the Bell and really understand what the marketplace of Lloyd's was. And like many, I thought that was interesting because they talked to me about DNO and the satellite and things which were different. When we thought about insurance, we thought about car, home, travel. Mm-hmm. But actually, they excited us with the fact that there are so many additional things which needs cover and risk management. And, some people do not like me saying that. Dawn Miller said, please don't use that terminology, but I fell into insurance. And I adore it. Dawn, absolutely love the career I've selected because of the relationship and in some ways the kindness you actually find in our industry. So when you look at the industry, so adjacency to building your own business, right? And then trying to solve for a problem that I guess not many brands are doing very well. So tell us a little bit about Stella Insurance and what you find interesting when you think about our industry.
Yeah, so look, I managed to really sort of evolve into Stella, I'd say, as I evolved into myself as I got older. So I've been in insurance for 26 years, was motor insurance dealing with, brokers throughout the country. It's a very male-dominated environment. And look, there are positives and negatives to that. I do believe that I got some advantages from being the only female-founded business in the sector at the time when I set up. It made us unusual. And actually, I had a real reflection point recently for an unfortunate set of circumstances. A woman that used to work for me died recently, and she was an incredible human being, very charismatic, very much loved. And when I went to a funeral, there was a lot of people there that worked for me 20 odd years ago. And I was chatting to one of the women, and she was saying, we didn't realise at the time just how revolutionary it was, because we had an entirely female management team. And, we had sort of this reputation. We were all in our 20s and 30s, very spirited, high energy, going out and doing business with this very male-dominated marketplace. And I think we probably did sort of get through the door in the first instance, almost, not despite of it, probably because of it, because there was an interest of, this is unusual, we don't normally see that. But you do come at things from a very different perspective, I think. There is gender differences. People don't always like to acknowledge it. But women do business differently. They approach things differently. They have different needs, and they have different risks that they're exposed to. And one of the things that I always loved about the concept of insurance was this idea that a group of people would come together and effectively everybody puts money in the pot so that if one of them is vulnerable, they can support them. And that community ideology that sits behind insurance I find very appealing. And when you look at that through the lens of women, you see a set of circumstance where my general experience, when it works well with large groups of women, and I'm sure you've seen this too, and we saw it in Barcelona at that leadership conference, there's such a magic when you get a group of women together that are all aligned on the same goal, and they support each other in a way that is, I believe, really special. So for me, this idea that financial services is so male dominated, and it's looked, you talked before, look very much through the lens of what products are we going to insure. It's very 100%. Practical, you know, I'm going to insure my car, I'm going to insure my house. The question for me was, are women's needs and the risks that they're being exposed to really being thought about from a product design viewpoint, from a business perspective? Or is there a possibility that because of this over-indexing that something's being missed? And that was the sort of original thought process when I evolved into insurance, as to could there be an opportunity here to do something quite different?
That's fascinating. And so, yes, we are in a male, still very dominated industry. 10% of CEOs around the world, I believe is still the case, are women, female CEOs within Fortune 500. When I did the research, looking at the McKinsey research that they do every year, the number actually doesn't change much. You know, layer and mid-management tend to be potentially 50-50, but as you go up the ladder, it's reduced. European country, probably France, we find more 50-50. So when you start looking at challenges that we face as women leaders and that you are trying to solve for with Stella, what are the challenges you wanted to package maybe in the experience you're bringing with Stella Insurance?
From a consumer perspective or from a business perspective?
Actually, let's go into the business one first.
Yeah.
And then we can actually dive in the latter.
Yeah, so look, and again, you know, you look back on things and perhaps see them through a slightly different lens. I think one of the big challenge, well, there's lots of challenges that I observe. I think if you start at the very beginning, most women are, and there's been lots of studies on this, they are educated to not back themselves. Like even in the playground type dynamic, we have a tendency to try and overprotect girls. With boys, you know, you'll be all right, get up, carry on, rough and tumble. There is a subtle discounting that happens with girls that you see actually their confidence really starts to deteriorate rather depressingly from the age of 7 or 8. And so I find that the instance of imposter syndrome in women is much, much higher than it is in men. They second guess themselves continually. Am I good enough? Is this good enough? And from a societal viewpoint, unfortunately, we also question women far more than we question men. And again, this has been proven time and time again. Lots of university studies. There was one where they gave a known investor case where it was a female investor that had been particularly successful. And they gave to the students exactly the same information. You've probably come across this before. They gave exactly the same information, but they just changed the gender on it. And then they asked them questions like, do you like this person? Would you trust this person? You know, would you back this person? And universally, when given the male version of exactly the same information, they trusted more, backed more, liked more. And so we're not that comfortable even today with strength in women, with confidence in women, because the natural assumption is that if a woman doesn't doubt herself, there must be something wrong with her, almost underneath the surface. So I think that stops a lot of women pushing forward for career development that you would want to really be in those roles. And then when you add to that the disruption that they have to their career from having babies and just the natural responsibility that falls in the home to women, then you've got a perfect storm that will result in exactly the stats that you talk about, where there's such a smaller percentage of women in senior leadership roles. But I think for me personally, I didn't suffer with that. I had quite a unique childhood, and I've always been quite bold with the things that I do. And that's not because I think I'm special in any way. I've given a keynote a few times, and, the main driver of it is there's nothing special about me, so you guys can absolutely do this too. I think one of the main things that I have is that I don't assume that anybody else is special either. My general assumption is that all human beings are fucktards to a certain degree and deeply flawed, including me. And that gives me a level of comfortability to kind of go out and try stuff and know that my failings are no different to anybody else's failings. But I think what you do lack as a woman going into a very male-dominated space is probably the network. Because, when I look at how people gain success, keep success, move and navigate, it's still very much, the old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And people feel comfortable with people that look like them, act like them, sound like them. And so the disadvantage of that sort of complex network that men are more likely to be able to easily lean into, I think, is a big factor.
Yeah. So what about you, right? You have been an entrepreneur from, I guess, a very long time, and I would say even from a very long age, because when you look at our industry, a lot of entrepreneurs actually probably are much older because they find a problem within the industry of where they worked, and then they go and build their startup because the technology allows us to do so now. So when you look at your own experience, Sam, what has been some of the challenges? I've had imposter syndrome, like many other women, wondering whether, I'm going to be able to do my own stuff as well. So what has been yours?
Look, so I don't like I don't necessarily agree with everything that Musk says, but one of my favourite quotes of his in terms of being an entrepreneur or a founder CEO is that it's like staring into the abyss whilst eating broken glass.
Yes.
And he says the staring into the abyss part is that you do lots of things as a business owner and you can never know if it's really going to work. So you are taking a huge leap of faith in any business that you go out and set up. And then the broken glass analogy is that as the owner of the business, you are the distillation point for all of the worst problems that the business is going to have. Because if things are going well, nobody's going to come to you with it. They'll come to you when the shit is really hitting the fan and will expect you to find solutions for it. And I have had a infinite amount of existential crises over the years where I've really thought, this is the end. Like, there's no way we can make it through this. There's not a solution. There's not a path. And it's a really lonely place to be at times because you are in that sort of unique position that it is on you.
Yeah.
You can't be sure that it will all work out. There's no guarantees. And there will always be moments where you are faced with a challenge that in the moment feels completely insurmountable. And I've had that. I was in 2013, I had a business that was turning over £18 million. It was making £4 million profit. I thought I'd absolutely smashed it. I was in my 30s. I went and lived in Beverly Hills. I was rocking around, feeling like a superstar. And then there was a massive regulatory change in the market that I was in. And I lost 60% of my income stream in a 4-week period.
Oh my.
And it was brutalizing. And I had to reshape the business. I had to restructure. I really had to scrabble to survive. But I did. And I think the more times that you go through that, the more confident that you become that you can find a way through. And so the irony is the process itself of the do is the thing that gives you the confidence to carry on doing the doing. But you do have to do the first thing, and you have to make it through your first really big challenge. I actually almost feel sorry for entrepreneurs that, and this is going to sound strange, but a lot of business owners now will go and get investment before they start, so they'll get funded by somebody, and so there's a cushioning to that to a degree, and they might get into a false sense of comfortability. Somebody's providing the cash and you're doing your thing, that then suddenly you get the rug pulled out from under you because the people that were providing the funding disappear, and you haven't necessarily gone through that rough and tumble of how do I find the capital to make this carry on going. And I think that almost is almost like helicopter parenting. It doesn't set people up to be able to get through some of the challenges that exist in business.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. I think building that resilience, partly when I've been employed, right? You've worked as an employee and you've got the salary every month. And situation when you're an employee is at some point you never know if there's a down market. And, in consulting, I've seen so many redundancy. Actually, I've experienced them when I was working in consultancy. But then when you actually set up your own business, you become a founder, an entrepreneur, all those great words. As you said, and I do like that quote from Elon Musk as well, that you are literally standing on the precipice and it feels like you're eating broken glass. I've seen that quote. I said, some days it does feel like that. But what you end up doing is building some coping mechanism, and you're continuously evolving, refining, and building resilience so that you are able to surmount any situation in life that may come to you. I think those are great skills today, very necessary skills, right? As I think when I look at some of the generation, things have been much easier, I think, for some of the generation going into work today. And they don't always understand that. The people like you and I, whilst we've been smiling when we walk out the door, it doesn't actually mean that it has always been easy. It doesn't mean that we have not been working until 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning to actually get the results, right? And so I think, you have this face-off. But at the end of the day, the only way you can progress and move forward is actually feel those experiences, which are not always easy.
No. Well, very rarely easy. Yeah.
But how has that impacted your leadership style and the way you manage people, actually, Sam?
Yeah, so again, look, somebody described me as a ruthless self-improver the other day, which I'm hoping was a compliment. I think the biggest thing that I've learned about managing people, and look, I still, it's not a natural place for me. I much rather go out and do the deals and do the business, and but I probably have lent more in the last 2 years to actually that very hands-on being with the people and working through things, because I found where things have fallen over in the past, it's almost inevitably the same thing. And it's ironic because it's the simplicity of it that I find fascinating. You can read all these complex management books about how to manage people and what to do, but actually it comes down to good relationships. And I think we can be frightened when we're managing people because there's a fear if you get too close that people will take advantage, that you've got to have this, they have to be afraid of you, otherwise they're not going to deliver results. There's all sorts of stuff that goes through people's heads. But actually, I find in terms of building good relationships, the principles apply. So firstly, you can't build a good relationship with somebody who hasn't got a good relationship with themselves and isn't prepared to accept, acknowledge, or work on that. And this is it sounds so simple, but for me it's so true. Like if you try and bring somebody along the journey, or create a good culture, and you've got somebody who's dealing with issues with themselves, that they can't manage themselves, they will never be able to bring a good version of themselves into work. So I think it's really important when you're recruiting people to really understand this. Is this somebody that's self-aware? Is this somebody that's accountable? And is this somebody who wants to communicate and work through problems together? And it's exactly the same criteria that I would apply to any relationship, be it friendship, romantic. If you haven't got those things, forget about it. Doesn't matter how smart they are. Doesn't matter, how well recommended they are. It just won't happen. So let's assume you've brought somebody in. And I'm not talking about perfect humans that don't have any baggage, by the way. We all have baggage. That's not the point. It's how much are you prepared to acknowledge your baggage, understand where it's showing up at work, and work through it. So let's assume that you've made a good hire and they've come in and they have the competencies and they're self-aware and accountable. The next thing for me in terms of managing people is, and this has been like a real revelation for me, I have got braver and braver at the conversations I'm prepared to have with people. Like really hard conversations. And conversations that say, you just said this is how I'm receiving it. Is that what you meant for me to receive? Can we talk this through? And that can be a very uncomfortable position to start with, but it is absolutely magic when you do it, because what you actually end up doing is creating a psychologically safe environment, because people start to realize that they don't need to mask, they don't need to hide stuff. They can be a human being at work and talk it through and resolve problems. And then actually the business stuff, I think, becomes so much easier, because most of the business problems that I come across are when people try and hide mistakes, when they will not let others in, when they are incapable of doing something, a false confidence or bravado around a problem that they're trying to deal with that really actually requires them to step back and go, you know what, actually I can't. And all of those things come back to, do I feel safe? Am I safe in this environment to show up and be honest and call out flaws?
So it's interesting, right? Because that ability to be genuine and authentic, I think it's partly the equation you're talking about. How has it been for you to manage conflict? Has it been a progression? Because, when I look at my Belbin and, plan profile, managing conflict still is one of my least strong competencies, actually.
Yeah, so look, absolutely, through all of my childhood issues, I definitely, and people would be surprised by this because they would go, but you're so unapologetic, and I absolutely have people-pleasing traits. I do not like, you say, well, nobody does, but some people really don't care that much. I don't like hurting people. Yeah. I really struggle if I've caused pain, and I can see that I've caused pain. And in the past, that made me less able to confront situations because I was uncomfortable to bring stuff up in case I hurt the other person's feelings. And that avoidance actually was so detrimental to the business and to the individual. Mm-hmm. Like it doesn't help a person if they are not getting honest feedback. Yeah. And I think one of the things that helped me go on that journey, other than, just doing it and realizing nobody died and it was okay, was just applying it to myself. Yeah. So if somebody, the worst thing in the world if somebody's upset with you is that they ignore you or ghost you, or because you're left hanging then, not knowing what on earth it was that happened, that went wrong, and these situations can happen in work. Mm-hmm. Managers can start to avoid the people that they don't enjoy interacting with because of conflict avoidance. And actually, when you look at it from your own personal lens, if somebody comes to you and says, can I have a chat? Something happened and I don't feel great about it and I just want to talk it through with you. And you get the opportunity to actually heal together. I appreciate that, and it makes me feel much closer to the individual and much safer with the individual when they are able to tell me what upsets and bothers them, and we're able to talk it through. And so it's a gift. Feedback is a gift if done with kindness.
Yeah.
So there's no need to be hurtful or derogatory to somebody when you're trying to work through something, but there is a very real need to be honest, because that's the kindness that you are giving them.
So I want to go back to a point you made a little bit earlier. So, as you know, I've been in innovation now for 10 years, moving from corporate to building acceleration programs. And one of the big themes I'm working on now, my big, I would say, manifesto is around the venture client model, which is, a venture becoming the client. So a venture becoming the vendor of a client, the client being a corporation. So still focus on B2B, looking at how we can improve the operation of an insurance operation, so an insurance organization. But also see how we can start shaping products and services which are more aligned to the customer needs, and maybe at some point, change the business model as a service. Insurance have a lot of data. They could start monetizing things, hopefully, in the future if they are more bold to actually identify new clients for that data. Now, when you start thinking about the entrepreneur, you highlighted that a lot of them are going for funding. And the premise of venture client is not, funding is not that important. What is more important is find your clients, find your buyers. What is your view on finding your first buyer as an entrepreneur, having built Stella Insurance? What is your view of selling good offers vis-a-vis going for investor funding?
Ooh. And are the two, heavily entwined?
Yes.
And that is the problem, I guess. My first business I started from my sister's conservatory, and I just literally picked up the phone and started phoning round brokers and asking them if they would let me handle their claims. Now, the benefit of that is you don't need to get funding and you can do it your own way. You're learning on the job, experiencing direct feedback as to what you're doing. The downside is your foundations that you're building on, it might not be the ideal foundation that you want to go forward with. And in today's sort of tech-driven world, I think what I think is really interesting is probably, even 3 years ago, the cost of tech was such that it would be very difficult to do a startup without funding if it was in the tech space, because you need developers, you need infrastructure, you need all of these things. And what I think is really quite fascinating now is with the speed with which AI is developing, I suspect that the cost to start up it is substantially lower now than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And so what you're actually doing is trying to your point, find problems that you think consumers want solving, and then test and learn whether you can create a meaningful proposition that is going to solve that problem. Yeah. Now, when I launched Stella, I had some funding, which, was different to when I launched my first business from my sister's conservatory. And I do think I built the business slightly differently in that I was able to set the environment up in the way that I wanted to. So, Stella at the moment, it's on its own technology platform. That platform is can API into any system. and all of the data is in Snowflake and is, discoverable and visible and structured in a way that enables me to do some pretty exciting things as somebody who is innovative and wants to solve different types of problems. And there's a cost to that, to set that environment up. But to your point, I don't think that's where the real value is. I think the real value is identifying the right problem to solve and having the right mindset to, try and fail. And sometimes these very, well structured, invested businesses also follow far too rigid a process for a startup to be successful.
Yeah, that's fair. So let's talk about Stella Insurance, because you have been on a mission to actually create something which is pro-woman. Mm-hmm. So tell us about the proposition, the company, where it lives. Just share a little bit more about Stella. Because I've seen you present Stella a few times on stage, and I even cried. I cried when I heard the story.
Yeah, look, I am passionately pro-women. I think that the world is a substantially better place when it is balanced. And I think, on both sides, if you see an excessive amount of one side of energy other than the other, we end up in a disharmony and bad things happen. And I think there is way too much masculine energy in the world right now, is my personal belief. And so, that sits at the core of me. But when I look at financial services, we have a generational shift of wealth to women. We also simultaneously have, unfortunately, a deeply uneducated, by large, female population globally when it comes to finances. Mm-hmm. There is a huge educational gap between women and men in terms of managing money, in terms of planning for the future. It's a terrifying stat. And the results of that are there are more women over the age of 50 going homeless in all civilized societies than has ever been in the past. And this is, they aren't as provided for. They don't have the same amount of money in their pension pot. They often abdicate responsibility for their financial well-being to their men in their life because, years ago people got married and they got married for life. And, the wife would say, the husband's going to go out to work and I'm going to be okay. And that is shifting now, but with a lack of financial empowerment in women. So I think it's imperative that financial services has the right conversations with women, because we are doing them a massive disservice if we don't. So I then look across all of the products that we provide. And look, we started in motor insurance in Australia just because I know motor insurance is the truth of it. And there has to be a level of commerciality and leaning into your strengths in order to be able to build a business. But even with motor, which you would think would be such a, generic vanilla product, we kind of went, okay, so, it was funny. We looked through the contents that were covered in car policies, and there was an underinsurance for what women would require. They tend to carry more expensive things around with them. Their handbags and their items are generally higher value, but also things like prams weren't covered. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds so stereotypical, but the reality is women tend to be more of the caregivers for children, and insurers haven't necessarily thought about these things. So we were adding in additional cover. And then we noticed that things like if your vehicle was damaged by somebody that you knew, then you weren't covered because that's a standard insurance clause. But it meant that victims of domestic abuse would naturally be, they'd have the claim repudiated, which just didn't make any sense. So things like that were, low-hanging fruit. We can do this. And then can we create a proposition that speaks to women? So, insurance, again, from a marketing viewpoint, very linear. We are the cheapest. Here's our brand. Please buy this product. And we said, no, we want to have a conversation with consumers. So we want to talk to our audience. We want to talk to them about these financial issues. We want to talk to them about incredible women that they should be, inspired by. And so we did a podcast with all of these incredible women that had done incredible things. We started the Stella Expert series where we had female race car drivers that would tell women how not to get ripped off when buying a car. We just really played with it in a way that we felt created a brand that could have a emotional resonance with our policyholders. And then we said, every time we sell a policy, we're going to give $5 to Women and Girls Emergency Centre, because that's, again, a cause that is close to our hearts, and it shows that we genuinely aren't just saying we're for women, we are supporting the causes that we think are important for them. And then, off the back of that, we've moved on to what else can we design in the product that offers additional support. So the travel insurance policy, we worked with the insurer to create emergency accommodation cover if somebody was a victim of domestic abuse. We have just worked very closely with a legal expense provider to provide a domestic abuse cover that would provide counselling and a legal portal for documents to be able to get additional support in. So for me, it really was just, if you are thinking from the lens of women in the existing products, what features do they have that aren't necessarily the right features for our target demographic? What's not missing? And even at a fundamental level, are there fundamental risks that women are being exposed to that just aren't being thought about at all, to your point of creating a product that doesn't exist today to cover a risk that perhaps people are just not really taking into consideration.
So that is very inspiring, right? Because instead of having the traditional home travel car policies, we now have offerings which are far more personalized for a specific target market based on their life and on the risk they're actually encountering. So when you look at how you have packaged your offer and the services you're providing women, how have you been able to build those unique products? I think I want to inspire people out there to actually see that it's possible. When I look at, my listeners, 45% women, 55% men, 150,000 downloads a month. So let's inspire those listeners about the proposition, but also what is possible to build product and services which are really aligned to a niche market.
Yeah, so look, I think I have found the insurance industry does want to innovate, but really struggles to do it themselves. So actually, you are pushing against an open door if you have a target market that they want access to. You think you can access it in a different, more unique way. I genuinely find that the insurance industry is super, super keen to engage. So, in Australia, I'm in a really solid position because I have my own technology. Because it's all direct. So I have a direct digital MGA where I'm not having to go through third-party channels to get traffic. People come to us. So that allows me to shape the customer journey experience, kind of have full control over the process. And then because it's my tech and all the data's in one place, I obviously can do things quite quickly and in a unique way. But your listeners don't necessarily need all of that to be able to start with this. From an insurance viewpoint, if you understand what markets insurers are keen on. So Zurich, for instance, in Australia, they are really keen to crack the life and health insurance market. Yeah. And they know that women are 40% less likely to buy life insurance, which is a crazy stat.
Yeah.
But it is what it is. So I think it's important to understand not just the problem that you see, but the business that the insurer is looking to write and trying to find the bridge between the two. So I want to support women, empower women, educate women, and create products that they feel seen by. But I also need to make sure that that works for the insurance company, because if I'm developing a product that they get no margin out of and have no interest in, I'm not going to get support. So bridging those two things is important. But once you have identified, yes, it's of interest to them, and you think you can do it in a special way, then I think being able to just, go out and start to really get an understanding of the customers, create that little bit of traction on behalf of the insurers, I do think that the optionality absolutely exists to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you knew, Zurich actually acquired, I think it was 2016, 2017, one of the startup, I accelerated through Startup Weekend.
Oh, fantastic.
Called FitSense for Covermore, actually. And it's where I could see that the market in 2016 to 2017 was really keen to start differentiating for, in that case, was people with diabetes. How can we create an insurance offer for people who manage their diabetes so well that actually they could actually pay normal insurance premium, even when they are flying? So that is, for me, one of the first instances when I saw insurance innovating by really understanding one very specific target market.
Yes, yeah. And I think that probably gets missed in the interpretation, because sometimes you're trying to solve a problem, but it's not a problem that anybody else cares about.
Yeah.
And you really need to be alive to that as an entrepreneur. And if you want to be an entrepreneur in insurance and you are deciding you don't want to go through the full balance sheet expedition, which is a lot, then you need to make sure that you are solving a problem that the insurance industry also perceives to be a problem.
Yeah, 100%. So Stella Insurance has won many awards. Can you tell us a little bit more about those? Because part of it is come from your background around really understanding the customer, claims management, but also delivering really unique and special customer experiences.
Yeah, look, I think, again, ironically, this does come down to people and technology and the beauty of the combination of the two. So we've got over 15,000 customers on our tech platform in Australia, but we actually only have, I think, 6 people in the call center handling all of their customers, and those 6 people really care. Like, they are Stella through and through. They care about the brand. They care about the proposition. But what I think has allowed us to really exceed the customer's expectations in the way that we have is that because we own our own technology, but because the culture is the way that it is in the business, the tech team have a very close relationship with both the underwriters and the customer service people.
Interesting.
And it's, what has happened since day one is if the customer service person is on a call and they have a consumer that's frustrated, that's trying to manage something online, and the process isn't quite working, and they can see where it's falling down, there has been a continuous feedback loop back to the IT team to go, guys, this doesn't work. Same for claims, same for underwriting. And we are able to, because the system's very easily configured, we're able to change that instantaneously. Now, of course, the thing that I am ridiculously excited about, and we've started to very much delve into, is then what can you do with AI on top of that when you understand the capabilities that this technology brings in? Because if your goal here is ultimate kind of bespoke, right customer, right outcome, right product, the way that the technology is able to iterate itself and evolve in real time allows you to do some very special things. And, just on a simple basis, and, this is not complicated technology, but we have just created our Stella GPT. So, we're playing around with it because the team loves to play. So, can we iterate? Can we do with this? And our customer portal at the moment is really straightforward. 4 or 5 questions. Because we've iterated and public source data, make it easy, make it seamless, make it quick, which is one of the things that we've always won awards for is just how easy the quoting and binding and experience is from that. So that we then go, okay, so how does technology improve that further? And we're now, we can have an AI agent where all the customer has to do is upload their policy document, and it will just pull all of the information that it requires from that. It will compare our policy with the market. It will tell them, what they have got with us that they wouldn't have with somebody else. That full transparency. But if you also look at the acquisition model and say, how do I get to exactly the customer profile that I want using this technology so that I am only quoting when I feel like there's an alignment there of this is who I am, this is who you are, and, we're presenting a price. You can just see how... where it's all going and how powerful this could be.
That's incredible. So you already mentioned some terms around innovation. How does innovation plays within the Stella world? You mentioned big data. You mentioned all data in one single place. And I think a lot of insurers need to do better to actually make the most of their data set and then augment that with external data sources. You mentioned artificial intelligence. Tell us about innovation and how you use technology to enable your business to move forward, but also service and answer the customer needs.
Yeah, look, I think you've always got to start, and Amazon has taught us this from the get-go, you have to start with the customer. And what do customers want from insurance? They want it to be easy, because everything else in their life is easy, and what we do to them is not easy. Right? So when I start, I think simple is probably the best way to look at problems. So when I start from a customer viewpoint, when we first started out and the technology was where it was, what we could do was, reduce, ask them less questions, make it easier, take away that problem. And now the technology has evolved so that we can make that even easier. So in an ideal scenario, the consumer goes onto their phone, pulls up ChatGPT, says, I need some insurance, can you help me? And you are providing the accessibility into that system so that you can present your product and allow the technology to give the honest answer to the consumer, and the consumer can just press a button and it all be done. And also done with confidence that they have validated that this is not only the best price, but there isn't a difference in cover. And I think that's been really lacking over the last few years in the race to cut costs out and commoditize insurance. There is a complete lack of understanding of what cover people have. So, you see a huge amount of instances with travel insurance, which is a very cheap product in the UK market, unbelievably cheap, and as such probably doesn't give the kind of cover that people would wish to have from it. And consumers just buy it because they have to, and then they're bitterly disappointed at the point that they have a claim. Yeah. Now, the technology is able very quickly and simply to articulate this is what you're getting and this is what you're not, without people having to run through reams and reams of information. And the technology is possible to simplify the process from the purchase viewpoint. So you've got validation, simplicity, transparency, and actually the end result of that is trust, because they trust the process to be able to give them the outcome that they want, and the expectation levels are balanced out because the information was correct in the first place. So, how do you achieve all of that? It has to be through, one, setting your environment up properly, simple stuff. Have all your data in one place, have it accessible from your system viewpoint. Anybody, I thought about this the other day, and it's probably quite a bold statement, but anybody that is investing heavily in any system that is not an AI system today is an absolute idiot. That's what I genuinely believe. You are taking a knife to a nuclear arms race, not even to a gunfight. You spend money on upgrading your system at the moment that isn't AI based. How the hell is it going to compete with what's available in the market? Just insane. Don't even bother. Put your money away. Put your money away, because it will wipe you out if you're comparing apples with apple. There's no question of it. So set your environment up so that you have an environment that can engage appropriately with the new technology. But then the rest of it has to be the culture in the business. You have to allow people to fail fast. You have to allow people the space to iterate and test. Even if it's in our Stella GPT is not in a live environment, but it's in an environment where the whole team can engage and ask questions and, play around and do we think that this works? You more than ever before, I think businesses need that.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of insurers build their own private, I call them the private GPT, so name of insurer and GPT at the end, and they're actually evolving with agentic AI as well now, which is fascinating. And it's very important to understand that they are building those GPTs on top of their knowledge base, right? To actually enable, like you are, employee to be curious and play with the technology. There are two things you said, which I think I'd love to dive a little bit into. Trust and transparency. I think it is a year of trust and transparency. I've talked to 60 executives. I've actually chaired over 8 conferences in the beginning of the year. And those were probably the 2 consistent words that I've heard from executives that are trying to create that purpose-driven relationship with their customer through trust and transparency. The second pillar you actually mentioned is about, when you start building your technology, you need to do that with purpose. And so that's where that takes me to my next question is, when I look at Stella Insurance and looking at where the market is going, and we have a lot of uncertainties affecting us all right now, how does social responsibility climate plays into your strategy?
Climate,
yes.
Look, so we probably don't do as much on that as we should. I think in motor insurance there are a number of opportunities to innovate and provide some meaningful impact from a climate viewpoint. We've got telematics technology. And we looked at a piece of tech in Australia that was super interesting. They'd worked with the Melbourne government, and what the proposition was saying is, does the way that people drive impact their carbon footprint? This is just like an example of a use case. And they discovered it absolutely does. People that are aggressive drivers, that drive too quickly, aggressive braking, they produce a lot more carbon.
Interesting.
And so then, again, you think about the alignment from an insurance viewpoint. Telematics gives good driving scores to people that drive responsibly, probably don't drive aggressively, don't brake aggressively. And their premise was, could you, if you had the right technology, could you get people to drive safer and therefore reduce their carbon credits, carbon footprint, and would that ultimately produce a better outcome? And they proved it. So they did this whole test. They put the devices in. People drove a certain way. They managed to give through messaging about how it was impacting the environment. They managed to get people to drive safer. That also improved the environment. And I think there are always ways from an innovation viewpoint for you to be able to tackle social issues that you might not initially consider when you're looking at the technology from a use case viewpoint.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give, I guess, leaders out there when they actually start looking at what is affecting us today and starting reassessing and redesigning strategies to address the need of a customer of the future?
I think listening is really important. I remember when we did the first research for Stella, and I was surprised by some of the outcomes, to be honest. We partnered. I did a Media for Equity deal with Bauer Media, so we got sort of 15 million of inventory across all this female magazine space to launch the brand, which was like one of the components that allowed us to kind of really drive forward in the initial instance. But as part of that, we did a big research piece where we went out and asked women what they liked about insurance, what they didn't like about insurance, and there was some stuff that came out of there that I wasn't expecting.
Okay.
And I think if you have a real drive to and a purpose for something, and that will be different for everybody. I'm passionate about women and empowering women. Other people will be passionate about other social issues that they really feel like need to be highlighted. You just need to be mindful that my version of being passionate about women may well be completely different to my customers' expectations in that. And so I think creating again, safe space, but with your customers to really hear what it is that they want to see from you as an organisation, and can you bring those 2 points together, is a really important factor.
So now let's go back a bit onto you. What has been your proudest moment as a CEO?
Oh, that's a big one. I think seeing Stella actually come to life and make a difference, seeing the traction around some of the product design that we've done. And, I remember even the first campaign that we ran, and we were recording for it, and there was all these people, in a room kind of making it happen, and realizing that all these people were there supporting Stella and being aligned with our values because I'd jumped on a plane and had some random idea to set up was a really proud moment. But I've also had the same level of pride from unbelievably difficult sets of circumstance. I said to somebody recently, just because something's hard doesn't mean it has to be miserable. Yeah. So when I've had times where I've nearly lost the business and it's been excruciatingly difficult, and I've had many of those, it doesn't stop. It doesn't get any easier unless you decide to hang in your shoes and sell up. But the group of people that have supported you with it and are fighting through, and you manage to make it work and get to the other side. I actually think, in a weird way, there's more pride in that than there is in the, on stage at Forbes or getting an award, or because it feels very genuinely earned.
So next is, what advice would you give to your youngest self, looking at where you are today?
Give up drinking sooner. It's the gift that keeps on giving. I think it sounds cliched, but trusting yourself more from a younger age. The mistakes that I made in the early years and still fall foul of on occasion is you can get not hoodwinked, but I think, and you probably come across this, you sometimes in business there are people that overcomplicate things to an nth degree, but they sound really clever when they talk about this overcomplication. And every time something has gone wrong for me, it's been when I've thought, I don't really understand that, but this person clearly knows what they're doing and they understand it better than I do. So I'm going to trust that they're headed in the right direction. And I think that the advice that I would give my younger self is, if it doesn't make sense, you're smart. It probably doesn't make sense.
Yes. And we've seen a lot of that, right? People using flourish words to confuse you in some ways and said, okay, something I need to research because I'm not expert on that topic. And then you realize actually it was not well researched, but some people are eloquent at convincing and persuading.
And it's, I also heard, and it's so true, the smartest people I have ever known are able to make very complicated things simple to understand.
Absolutely.
So if I don't understand now, I am not doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to assume something's funky with whoever's describing it to me. So that would probably be the advice I'd give my younger self.
My last question is about Stella. Tell us, any special project you're looking into at the moment?
Yeah, look, there's lots of exciting stuff on the horizon. I am deeply excited about what we can do with AI to improve the customer experience and also to acquire customers in a different kind of way. I am chatting to some investors in the US who like the idea of a female-empowered brand coming over and maybe shaking things up a bit. I'm not sure how that will go down, but I am excited for the...
Let's give it maybe a year, but yeah, I'm sure we are going to get there again.
Yeah, I am sure we are. And just really, we're still... From a core viewpoint, we're still very much focused on delivering the right outcomes for our insurance partners, and that's improved year on year. So, I'm happy that the basics are there in terms of good hygiene and, profitability and loss ratios, etc. But I think there is such a huge shift that is going to be coming in a very short space of time. I am absolutely convinced that the whole distribution chain is going to be blown apart in the next 12 months with the speed of technology and the adoption of it. And I've never said it before. When people have said it before, I've said, I don't think so. It's going to take longer. I think it's here.
It's here. It's here to stay.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me on Scouting for Growth. And I cannot wait to actually have all our listeners getting to know you better.
Thank you for having me on, and it's lovely to see you as always.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scouting for Growth. Please subscribe, share with friends, and leave a 5-star rating. Your rating is so valuable. I review all of them, and my team help me adapt content to meet your needs. Also, connect with me on my preferred channels. I am a B2B growth expert, so you will find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads, and X as well as Blue Sky. All information available below. Until next, keep scouting for growth.